As night descends, it marks the moment for us to unwind after a tiring day. However, it is also when our emotions tend to be at their peak. In today's video, we will explore a deeply emotional story, a single mother sharing an unforgettable experience with her son on a chilly winter evening at their home. The most intense and memorable night of my life was that Saturday. I had an unusual sensation of serenity since the house was so quiet and serene. After a hard week, I was worn out and just wanted to go to sleep. I believed that nothing could break the silence of the night when I lay down. For the past 9 years since my divorce, I have been a single mom. I didn't have a negative relationship with my ex-husband. We simply drifted apart. But there was a consolation and a challenge for me that was raising my son Jack. He meant the world to me, bright, funny, and compassionate. Yet being both his mother and father was no easy task. That night, I was so exhausted that I barely managed to change into my pajamas before collapsing into bed. The house remained utterly quiet. My son Jack had finished his schoolwork and played video games before going to bed earlier than usual. I ultimately had some alone time. Through the thin curtains in my room, the moon shined, creating gentle shadows on the walls. I relaxed beneath the blanket, savoring the warmth and allowing my thoughts to wander. After a challenging year, it had been good to have a tranquil life lately. Since his father departed from us, Jack and I have experienced a lot together, but we have managed to create a stable and happy life. We remained close, even though Jack was now approaching 19. He was always a kind and considerate son. I was occasionally concerned that he shouldered too much responsibility for his age. Thinking of him brought a smile to my face. He was so kind, and I felt truly fortunate to have him in my life. But tonight exhaustion was taking over. I felt drowsy and heavy. Then a soft knock on my bedroom door stirred me from sleep. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but the gentle knock came again, pulling me fully awake. "Mom!" Even though Jack spoke quietly, I was awakened by his voice. I tried to concentrate on the door by blinking. In the faint hallway light, I could make out Jack's shape. I sat up, attempting to fully awaken. "What's wrong, Jack?" My voice was still drowsy as I asked. After a moment, my son entered the room and silently shut the door. Jack looks uncertain about entering. He stepped close to my bed and said, I couldn't sleep. I could sense something was troubling him, and it made me anxious. Since the divorce, Jack had occasional sleepless nights, but he seldom spoke about it. I knew his father's departure had affected him deeply, even if he didn't show it much. Tonight, the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. "Come here," I said softly, patting the empty spot next to me on the bed. "You can stay with me tonight if you want, son." He hesitated briefly before coming over and lying down beside me. Facing me, I could see how exhausted he looked in the dim light. He seemed unusually vulnerable. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked quietly. Jack shook his head, his dark hair falling over his eyes. "No, I just wanted to be near you." A gentle warmth filled my heart. It had been a long time since my son Jack sought comfort this way, reminding me of when he was younger. I reached over and brushed his hair from his forehead, offering him a soft smile. "It's okay," I whispered, resting my hand on his shoulder. "You can stay as long as you need." He returned the smile, though a hint of sadness lingered in his eyes, something he wasn't ready to share. I didn't press him to go to sleep immediately. Rather, I lay back down, pulled the blanket over both of us, and let the quiet wrap around us like a safe cocoon. For a while we stayed there. His breathing slowed, and I thought he'd fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, do you ever miss him?" The question caught me off guard, though I knew he meant his father. It was something I'd long avoided confronting, uncertain how to respond. After a pause, I admitted softly, "Sometimes I have." Jack nodded slowly, though I could see he was still searching for something more. Jack asked me, "Mom, do you ever think things could have turned out differently?" I exhaled slowly, memories stirring. Maybe. But we can't change the past. We can only move forward. My son stared down, absently tugging at the edge of the blanket. He said, "I just wonder if maybe I could have done something different. Like if I had been better." His words pierced my heart. I sat up and gently took his hands in mine. "Jack, listen to me. None of this was your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." He looked away, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes it feels like if I'd been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." Tears welled up in my eyes as I pulled him into a tight hug. My son hesitated for a moment before finally hugging me back, his face pressed into my shoulder. My voice trembled as I spoke. "Jack, my son, listen to me. Your dad made his own choices. It was his decision and it had nothing to do with you. It was never your responsibility." "You've always been more than enough for me, Jack," I murmured, my voice tender and filled with love. "You mean everything to me." He nodded into my shoulder, but I could still feel the tension within him, the weight of years of unspoken guilt and pain. We stayed there, holding each other tightly, the silence between us offering a soothing comfort. Slowly, his body began to relax, his breathing deepened, and he drifted off to sleep. Yet, as he lay peacefully beside me, my mind raced, flooded with memories and thoughts swirling in the quiet darkness. We'd weathered so much together, carrying invisible burdens that shaped who we were, but in the stillness of that shared embrace, I felt something stir within me, an unfamiliar sensation I couldn't quite define. It was a warmth spreading through my chest, a connection that seemed deeper, more profound than the usual bond between a mother and her son. I tried to push it away, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of his breathing, but the feeling lingered, a quiet, insistent whisper, refusing to be ignored. Morning came all too quickly, the soft glow of dawn casting gentle shades across the room. Jack lay peacefully beside me, his face serene and free of the tension that had gripped him the night before. I watched him briefly, my heart swelling with a mix of love and pride. Yet beneath the surface of my maternal affection, something deeper lingered, an emotion I couldn't quite define. I carefully slipped out of bed, ensuring not to wake him, and headed downstairs to prepare breakfast. The familiar rhythm of cooking offered comfort, but my mind remained tangled in our late-night conversation. I hadn't fully realized how much Jack had internalized his father's absence. The guilt he'd carried all these years. It broke my heart, knowing my son silently borne such a heavy weight. Nevertheless, it wasn't only that guilt that occupied my mind. It was the way he had looked at me, the vulnerability in his eyes, the silent yearning for something more. And if I were truly honest, the warmth I'd felt while holding him had awakened something profound within me, a connection that seemed to reach beyond the boundaries of our familial bond. I shook my head, forcing myself back into the present, yet that feeling lingered, a quiet whisper that refused to fade. Not long after, my son Jack wandered into the kitchen, his hair tousled and his frame still caught between boyhood and adulthood. Yet there was something different in his eyes, a quiet strength, a sign of the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a gentle smile, doing my best to hide the emotions lingering from the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," I said warmly, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of him. "Morning, Mom," he murmured, settling into his seat and diving into his breakfast. We ate in a comfortable, easy silence, the soft glow of morning light wrapping the kitchen in warmth. I noticed his gaze occasionally resting on me, but I decided not to bring up the events of the previous night. He seemed calmer, more like himself, and I didn't want to disturb the delicate sense of peace we had managed to find. Jack ultimately broke the silence, his voice trembling with emotion. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I really needed that." His vulnerability surprised me. I replied, "You never need to thank me, Jack. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." He nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on mine, an unspoken question hanging heavily between us. I wasn't sure how to answer, how to handle the subtle shift in our relationship. There was a new intensity in his gaze, a longing for a connection that went beyond the usual bond of mother and son. And a part of me, a part I hadn't dared to confront before, felt it too. Following breakfast, my son Jack lingered by the counter, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the countertop. Jack asked softly, his voice weighed down by emotions he rarely voiced, "Mom, do you ever think things could have been different?" I exhaled deeply, the familiar weight of regret pressing down on me. "Maybe," I murmured, "but we can't alter the past. All we can do is keep moving forward." Jack gave a small nod, his eyes focused on his fidgeting hands. My son said, "Sometimes I wonder if I could have done more, been better, you know." His voice was barely audible, tinged with guilt and self-blame. His words struck a chord deep within me, and I instinctively reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder before pulling him into a gentle hug. "Jack, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He turned his gaze away, his words so quiet they were almost lost. "Sometimes it feels like if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." Tears filled my eyes as I pulled him close, holding him firmly. He hesitated briefly, but then gave in, pressing his face into my shoulder. "Jack, my son, hear me out," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Your father's decisions were his alone. You are, and always have been, more than enough. His leaving was never about you." He gave a slow nod, his body softening against mine, the tension in his shoulders gradually melting as he leaned into the hug. A familiar yet unfamiliar warmth stirred within me once more. A blend of relief, affection, and an undeniable sense of connection. The bond we shared, once strictly defined by the roles of mother and son, seemed to be transforming, evolving into something neither of us fully comprehended, yet both instinctively recognized. For now, I held my son close, allowing the moment to stretch on without questions, without explanations. I didn't know where this newfound closeness would lead, but I understood that our lives were shifting, and this was only the beginning. As I lay there in the darkness, wrapped in the warmth of my son's embrace, a profound realization swept over me. The fragile equilibrium of our relationship was altering, poised on the edge of something unknown and unexplored. A shiver of unease rippled through me, a quiet doubt about what this transformation might signify for us. Yet, intertwined with the unease was an unmistakable sense of excitement, an acknowledgement that this was only the start of a journey into uncharted territory. The day passed quietly. Jack retreated to his room, engrossed in homework and video games, while I occupied myself with household tasks. Yet there was a subtle shift in the air between us, an intangible change, a quiet tension, an unspoken recognition of a deeper bond that had formed. As evening arrived, my thoughts drifted back to Jack, his transformation from boy to young man, and the closeness we had shared the previous night. The more I reflected, the more I realized my feelings for him had changed, surpassing the boundaries of maternal affection. That evening after dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The room was dimly lit, the flickering images on the screen casting shadows across the walls. We sat mostly in silence, content in each other's company. But as the movie continued, I became increasingly aware of his nearness. the way his arm brushed against mine with each small movement. My heart raced, and I tried to focus on the film, yet the tension between us felt almost tangible, a silent symphony of unspoken emotions. Midway through the movie, Jack shifted closer, his arm pressing firmly against mine. This time he didn't move away, and the warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness through me. I met his gaze, noticing a depth of emotion in his eyes that mirrored the thoughts I'd been grappling to suppress all day. Without thinking, I reached out and took his hand, our fingers naturally intertwining. He didn't pull away. Instead, he gently took my hand. The simple gesture sent a flutter through my chest, a feeling both familiar and thrillingly new. We sat there for a while, hands clasped in the soft, dim light, a quiet acknowledgement of the shifting dynamics between us. It was a pivotal moment, an unspoken understanding that seemed to transcend the boundaries of our familial roles. I couldn't predict what the future might hold, but I knew things were changing. Jack was no longer just my son. He was someone I cared for in a way that words couldn't quite define. The movie had ended, but we remained on the couch as the credits rolled across the screen. I rested my head on Jack's shoulder, feeling the gentle rhythm of his breathing. It was a small gesture, yet it felt profoundly intimate, more so than anything we had shared before. "Mom," Jack said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm really glad you're here. I don't know what I'd do without you." My heart filled with emotion as I squeezed his hand again. I answered, "I'm glad I'm here too, Jack's son. You never have to worry about losing me. I'm not going anywhere." I didn't fully understand it then, but looking back I realized it was already an intimate kind of love. As I rested against Jack's shoulder, I became aware that whatever was unfolding between us was growing quickly. Strangely enough, it didn't unsettle me. In fact, it was thrilling, though I couldn't quite explain why. And in the days that followed, everything seemed, subtly yet profoundly, different. Jack and I moved through the house as if performing a carefully rehearsed dance, our routine unchanged, yet the atmosphere between us was charged with something new. There was a warmth in the way we navigated around each other, like an invisible thread pulling us closer, drawing us into each other's presence. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, to push aside the feelings that had awakened within me, but I couldn't ignore what had happened. I couldn't forget how his hand had felt in mine, how his touch had lingered on my skin. It had been such a small, innocent moment on the surface, yet it meant everything to me. And, as time went on, I realized more and more that I didn't want to forget. The connection between us was undeniable, and, with each passing day, it became harder to pretend that nothing had shifted. Jack, my son, seemed to sense it too. I noticed how he would watch me when he thought I wasn't aware, how his gaze lingered just a moment longer, and how he always seemed to find reasons to stay near me. One evening, several days after our quiet moment on the couch, we were tidying up after dinner. Jack was drying the dishes while I washed them, the steady rhythm of our tasks filling the kitchen with a serene calm. The evening moonlight streamed through the windows, casting a slight white hue over the room, making everything feel soft, as though we were enveloped in a dream. I handed Jack a plate, our fingers brushing briefly as he took it from me. That fleeting contact sent a familiar warmth through me, and I glanced up at him, catching his gaze. His eyes held the same gentle intensity I had noticed before. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked softly, his voice low but tender, making my heart ache. I answered with a small smile. "Yeah, I'm fine, just thinking." "About what?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. I didn't want to lie, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to be completely honest either. "About us," I said quietly, opting for a vague but truthful answer. Jack didn't look away. Instead, he set the dish down on the counter and turned to face me fully, his eyes searching mine. "What about us?" My heart raced in my chest. I hadn't intended for the conversation to take this direction, but now that it had, there was no turning back. The tension between us hung in the air, heavy and thick, like the stillness before a storm. "I don't know," I whispered. "It just feels like things have changed." Jack stepped closer, his body now just inches from mine. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the steady rhythm of our breathing. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch sent shivers down my spine. "They've changed," my son Jack said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "But that's not a bad thing, is it?" I looked up at him, my heart racing. The way he gazed at me, with such tenderness and care, was overwhelming. My mind spun, but all I could focus on was how close he was, how much I wanted to close this small gap between us and surrender to whatever this was. Then I admitted honestly with Jack, "Son, I don't know. I don't know what this is." Jack's hand lingered near my face, his fingers lightly grazing my cheek. "I think it's just us," he whispered. "Just you and me." I took a deep breath, leaning into his touch for a brief moment, letting the warmth of his hand calm the storm inside me. For so long it had been just the two of us against the world, leaning on each other, our bond unshakable. But now it felt like it was transforming into something neither of us had anticipated. When I opened my eyes, Jack was still watching me, his expression soft yet filled with emotion. My son Jack said, He hesitated, his voice catching in his throat. "I don't know how to explain it, but I care about you. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone." His words made my heart skip a beat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The emotions I had been suppressing for days, weeks even, came rushing to the surface, overwhelming me with their intensity. I had tried to keep them at bay, to stay composed, but now, standing so close to Jack, with his hand on my cheek and his eyes brimming with love, I couldn't deny it any longer. My son said, "I care about you too," I whispered, my voice trembling, "more than you know." Jack's eyes softened even more, and for a moment we stood there, frozen in time. The world beyond the kitchen faded away, leaving only the space between us, the connection that had been growing stronger with each passing day. Slowly, I leaned toward him, and I noticed he leaned in as well. I closed my eyes, letting the moment wash over me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly alive. This wasn't wrong or confusing. It was pure, simple love that had naturally grown between us, blossoming from years of care, trust, and understanding. That's what I told myself as we were busy. After 20 minutes, Jack decided it was over, and we lay there, slowly realizing what had just happened. When Jack pulled back, he smiled at me, his eyes full of warmth. "We're okay, right?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, my heart too full and overwhelmed by everything I was feeling. "Yeah," I whispered. "We're okay." That night, after we finished cleaning up, Jack and I sat together on the back porch, watching the stars. The night was quiet, the air cool and crisp, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I could breathe. The weight of the unspoken emotions between us had lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. Just sitting beside each other, sharing the quiet of the night, was enough. There was no rush, no pressure. Whatever this was between us, it was evolving at its own pace, and I was content to let it unfold naturally. Jack reached over and took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. I smiled, gently squeezing his hand, and we sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars twinkle above us. The relationship between us was palpable, real, and far more profound than I had ever anticipated. Sitting beside Jack under the vast night sky, holding his hand, I realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. As days turned into weeks, the quiet intimacy we shared became an integral part of our lives. There was no need for words, no need for labels. What was growing between us simply existed. flowing naturally in the way we exchanged glances, found excuses to touch, and shared those lingering private moments that belonged solely to us. With each passing day, our bond deepened, becoming more vivid and undeniable. I no longer felt conflicted. Jack was no longer just my son. He had become my close friend in a way I'd never imagined, as though our relationship had evolved into something perfectly suited for both of us, something we hadn't even known we needed. It was on a rainy afternoon in late autumn that everything seemed to crystallize. The sky was heavy with dark, swirling clouds, and the steady rhythm of rain against the windows filled the house with a soothing harmony. We were in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket together on the couch, the warmth of the flames combined with the cozy ambience of the moment, and I felt the magnetic pull between us intensify. Jack leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder, and I absent-mindedly ran my fingers through his hair, savoring the quiet closeness we shared. The rain's blurred veil over the outside world and the fire's gentle glow made the room feel like our own private sanctuary, amplifying the intimacy of the moment. I could sense Jack's steady, calm breathing, and without speaking, I knew he was thinking the same thoughts as I was. The emotions between us had grown so powerful that words felt unnecessary. We were completely in sync, perfectly aligned. Jack lifted his head slightly, turning to meet my gaze, and for a long moment, our eyes locked, communicating everything we felt without a single word spoken. We just stared at each other, the room bathed in the soft glow of the fire and the steady rhythm of the rain. In that moment, I knew that what we shared wasn't just love, it was something deeper, something that transcended the simple label of mother and son. It was a bond that had evolved into something tangible, something real. "Mom," Jack whispered, his voice low but full of emotion. I didn't respond, just waited for him to continue, knowing that whatever he was about to say was important. "I love you," he said softly, his hand reaching out to take mine. "Not just because you're my mom, but because of who you are, everything about you. And I don't know if that's okay or if it's wrong, but I can't help it." His words washed over me, filling the room with a warmth that made my heart ache in the best way possible. I had known this was coming. I had felt it too. But hearing him say it out loud, admitting the depth of his feelings, made everything feel more real. I squeezed his hand, feeling the steady pulse of his heart beneath my fingertips. "Jack's son?" I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "I love you too. I've always loved you, but this is different." He nodded, his eyes searching mine as if looking for reassurance, for some kind of answer to the question that hung between us. "I don't know what this means," I continued, "but I know that I feel the same way and it doesn't feel wrong to me. It feels like it's just right." Jack's face softened, and he smiled a small, gentle smile that made my heart swell with emotion. "I'm glad you feel that way," Jack whispered, "'cause I don't know what I'd do if you didn't." I reached up, brushing my fingers along his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my hand. "We'll figure this out," I said quietly, "together." For a long moment we sat in silence, our eyes locked, the soft patter of rain and the crackling fire filling the room. Words were unnecessary. Everything had already been conveyed. We both understood what we felt, and we both knew it was genuine and undeniable. Jack leaned in slowly, his gaze never wavering from mine, and gently, almost cautiously, he took my hand. When he pulled back, his eyes were filled with emotion, and I knew we had crossed a threshold we could never return from. Yet, instead of fear, I felt a profound sense of peace, as though this was where we were always meant to be. At that moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Jack drew me closer, wrapping his arms around me, and we sat there together, holding each other as the rain continued to fall outside. The fire flickered softly, casting a warm glow across the room, and I realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of quiet conversation, gentle touches, and tender kisses. We didn't discuss the future or what this new chapter in our relationship might mean. We didn't need to. All that mattered was the present, this moment, here and now, where we could simply be together. As the rain continued to fall outside, I found myself reflecting on how much had shifted between us in such a short span of time. Jack had matured from a boy into a man, and in that process, our relationship had evolved into something unexpected, something I had come to cherish. We've reached the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found our content engaging, a thumbs up and sharing it with your loved ones would be much appreciated. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for updates on our latest videos. Your support is everything to us. Until next time, take care and goodbye.